A war is many things at once. It is a humanitarian tragedy, it is a strategic maneuver, an economic crisis, and a political statement, which is why reporting a war is so difficult. You cannot just focus on one part of it. You must focus on everything. The cause, the politics, the objectives, the finances, all of it put together gives you the full picture. Here at Wion'S, we've done that. Even before the first shot was fired, we visited Ukraine, we met the locals, we talked to the experts, we visited the training fields. At that point, war was not a certainty. Yes, Ukraine was preparing for the worst, but they'd not given up hope. There was an outside chance that peace would prevail. As you can see, the reserve forces are getting ready. They're picking up the weapons here. This is how it's going to look. 17,000 foreigners from all parts of the world have come and joined this force. To my right is Belarus, to my left is Russia, and in front of me is Ukraine. Honestly, it's jarring to watch it again. Those snowy locations are now the front lines of the war. Those soldiers are perhaps in the trenches. And those bomb shelters, maybe frightened families used them in the early days of the war. Like I said, all of it is jarring. Those reports were from the first and second week of February, around 14 days before Putin invaded. Throughout that time, we dissected the looming war. We told you why Putin was obsessed with Ukraine, why the war may not go to plan, and how NATO sold fake dreams to Ukraine, which is quite different from the Western perspective. The CNNs and the BBCs of the world made up their mind. This would be a fight between good and evil. The democratic world on one side, Putin and his autocratic regime on the other. In other words, they picked a side. And don't get us wrong here, Russia is clearly the aggressor in this war. You cannot justify their invasion of Ukraine. We did not either. Instead, we tried to make sense of it. We tried to tell you why Putin invaded, why the NATO led Ukraine on. Answering those questions is key to war reporting. It's not just battlefield strategies or frontline casualties. It's also about the political calculations behind the war. Not everyone liked when we reported that. Earlier this week, they blocked our channel on the 22nd of March. No new uploads, no videos, a total block. We simply broadcast the Russian foreign minister's statement, just like we broadcast the Ukrainian minister's statement. We do not believe in censorship. We do not believe in telling half the story. Apparently, that's what YouTube wants. That is another aspect of this war. Technology is completely on Ukraine's side. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all over social media, support poured in for Ukraine, and credit to them. President Zelensky turned out to be a social media whisperer. His selfie videos went viral immediately. Around the same time, we began our second reporting assignment in Ukraine. Our Pakistan bureau chief was on the job. He traveled to 3 major Ukrainian cities: Lviv in the west, Kiev in the capital of course, and Irpin in the north. Remember, this was early March. Russia was making swift territorial gains around that time. Their soldiers had reached the outskirts of Kiev. Many expected the capital to fall any day.
There's probably you can hear that's shelling being done right now. We're seeing people are emotional leaving their houses. The situation here is pretty grim. The railway station is almost empty. I'm currently in Bukha, and this was the bridge that used to connect Irpin to Bukha. I'm at the Shemishel train station, which is serving as a connectivity route for the people of Ukraine.
6 months later, Kiev stands strong. Today, there were muted Independence Day celebrations. President Zelensky and the First Lady attended a prayer at the St. Sophia Cathedral. They also paid tribute to fallen soldiers at the Golden Domed Monastery. It was indeed a moving occasion, a reminder of Ukraine's resolve and courage. But as journalists, we cannot get carried away with emotions. We must deal with the cold reality.
I feel that I would have loved to have seen The World Is One news give us perhaps Putin's perspective, Putin's voice, not as a supporter, but just as at least a platform or an outlet for the whole world, at least on this half, the Western, has seen. All of this, has seen all of this these images. What I have not seen is any network just talk to Putin and just say, like, hey, what is it? Like, except for every network on our national news over here is just telling the people, the audience, that why isn't our POTUS doing this, going over there, and it's just, I'm just making an observational note. I appreciate that this is just a great little, summary of a debriefing on this, but like I said, I hope maybe down this line we'll get some word, but this is just what I'm thinking at this moment.
Like the rising cost of oil, or the endless supply of Western weapons, or India's position of neutrality, and that last one has been debated a lot. Western media sees India's neutrality as lacking principle, as tacit support for Vladimir Putin. But we've repeatedly explained the strategy behind it. India has historic relations with to fallen soldiers at the Golden Dome Monastery. It was indeed a moving occasion, a reminder of Ukraine's resolve and courage. But as journalists, we cannot get carried away with emotions. We must deal with the cold realities, like the rising cost of oil, or the endless supply of Western weapons, or India's position of neutrality, and that last one has been debated a lot. Western media sees India's neutrality as lacking principle, as tacit support for Vladimir Putin. But we've repeatedly explained the strategy behind it. India has historic relations with Russia. It is not something that can be sacrificed overnight, and it really comes down to nuances. Western media analyzes this war with broad strokes, something we've tried to avoid, because every conflict is influenced by history, culture, and sometimes race. This one in Ukraine is no different. You may have seen reports of European countries welcoming refugees with the red carpet, but that is just one side of the story. Those same countries also blocked the entry of black people from Ukraine. We see the plight of the Ukrainian people, and we have reported on their hardships. But what about the Western media? They only see race. The color of your skin, the color of your hair.
European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed.
These are not refugees from Syria.
Now, like Iraq or Afghanistan, this is a relatively civilized...
Ukraine does not deserve war or hardships because Ukraine is civilized. Well, this is what systemic racism looks like. Looking back, how would we describe our 6 months of reportage? Probably holistic. We reported from the battlefield, dissected the diplomacy and analyzed the strategy, all of this without picking sides. It's easy to get carried away in narratives of good versus evil or invade. Here at Wion'S, we've stuck the
civilized.
Ukraine does not deserve war or hardships because Ukraine is civil.
This is where I have to point out, let's go back and just hear.
Block the entry of black people from Ukraine. Historic relations with Russia, it is not something that can be has been debated a lot. Western media sees India's neutrality as lacking principle, as tacit support for Vladimir Putin. But
if that's a true statement of how that's a very hypocritical thing for us to, I mean, granted, India is a lot closer to Russia, and here we find out that they have a close relation to Russia. And so this is why they rationalize and justify or explain or testify that this is why they aren't doing what the rest of it's just they are the ones, I guess, being the scapegoat at this point, which again, from my observation here, Wion'S, again, what I said before, if India has such close relationships with Russia, and this network, this news station seems to be based out of India. Perhaps I'm wrong. I'm just speaking from what I'm seeing. And so, I don't know. Every time I hear her say, you didn't pick a side, I don't, it doesn't line up with just what I'm hearing right now. And I'm pointing it out for the world to see just how I am going to just go through and pass the judgment of God upon all the lights that were in the sky during all this time. So that's just a debriefing I'm giving everybody. But again,
We've repeatedly explained the strategy behind it. India has historic relations with Russia. It is not something that can be sacrificed overnight. And it really comes down to nuances. Western media analyzes this war with broad strokes, something we've tried to avoid because
So this could have been possibly, hey, now you go to Putin and say, hey, Putin, we're still friends. But, we also are cool with, all the rest of the world who's just kind of pissed off at you right now for just picking on our little brother over here. So just, can you just at least let us hear what you want us to say to them to defend or explain your actions or, give your side of this one-sided yet unbiased perspective that the media all claims that they don't have, but it's just... It's just a matter of, I'm not calling India guilty. I'm just saying there could have been another, perhaps, action. It could have been like Eve or Adam just being like, hey, we don't want that apple, or just catching it and just noticing this. I'm just sharing my light.
conflict is influenced by history, culture, and sometimes race. This one in Ukraine is no different. You may have seen reports of European countries welcoming refugees with a red carpet, but that is just one side of the story. Those same countries also blocked the entry of black people from Ukraine. We see the plight of the Ukrainian people and we have reported on their hardships. But what about the Western media? They only see race, the color of your skin, the color of your hair.
European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed.
These are not refugees from Syria.
Now, like Iraq or Afghanistan, this is a relatively civilized...
Ukraine does not deserve war or hardships because Ukraine is civilized. Well, this is what systemic racism looks like. Looking back, how would we describe our 6 months of reportage? Probably holistic. We reported from the battlefield, dissected the diplomacy and analyzed the strategy. All of this without picking sides. It's easy to get carried away in narratives of good versus evil or invader versus invaded, but conflicts are not so black and white. Here at Wion'S, we've stuck to facts and discussed the real politics. We've seen this war for what it really is, a needless conflict triggered by world powers, and Ukraine is the chess piece doing all the fighting. So that's the story of the last 6 months, and this war is nowhere near an end. What are the big takeaways? What lies ahead for Ukraine and the world? That's what we'll discuss next. Let's pull up Ukraine's map first. And this is takeaway number 1. Russia is not winning yet. It had hoped to capture Ukraine within days. Most experts said it would be a swift affair. Well, it wasn't. 6 months and counting, Kiev is still standing. Russian forces control just 20% of Ukraine. And this is a commentary on superpower Russia and its military capabilities. The broken down Russian tanks may have been hyped by the West swift affair. Well, it wasn't. 6 months and counting, Kiev is still standing. Russian forces control just 20% of Ukraine. And this is a commentary on superpower Russia and its military capabilities. The broken down Russian tanks may have been hyped by the Western press, but there's no denying the fact that Russia's supposed military superiority has not been seen in action. Takeaway number 2, the nuclear threat. It is rising. Look at where the fighting is on. The Donbas region in the east, Crimea in the south, and Zaporizhia in the southeast. And this last one, Zaporizhia, is a dangerous flashpoint. It's a nuclear power plant. It's Europe's biggest. It is also the latest battlefield. There have been warnings about a nuclear catastrophe, attempts to broker a ceasefire deal, but no luck. Number 3, the human cost. It continues to rise. No one really knows the true number of casualties, but we have some estimates. Almost 9,000 Ukrainian soldiers and anywhere between 15 to 20,000 Russian soldiers are said to have been killed in action. What about civilian casualties? The United Nations says more than 5,500 civilians have died in this war. Most agree the actual numbers could be much higher. This invasion has created the largest post-war refugee crisis in Europe. More than 6 million people have been displaced within Ukraine. Takeaway number 4, Europe's miscalculation. All the shuttle diplomacy, all the grandstanding about supporting democracy, and look where Europe is today, suffering a power crisis, reporting soaring inflation, and facing a difficult winter. Europe got this one seriously wrong, as did the US, and that's takeaway number 5. This was a reality check for America, this war. The world did not join their sanctions. They could not isolate Russia. Yes, their defense companies are rolling in money, but the political upsets for Joe Biden are way too big to ignore. And takeaway number 6, the global south stood up for itself. From Asia to Africa, countries refused to join Europe's war. They took decisions based on their own national interest. They refused to be bullied by either side. Case in point, India. Despite all the pressure and the lectures, India continues to buy Russian oil and is better off for it. So that's the 6 big takeaways from the last 6 months. That's where we are today. What happens next? Well, no good news. The fighting will not just continue, it will intensify by the looks of it. Ukraine has changed tack. Earlier it was defending itself, now it's on the off for it. So that's the 6 big takeaways from the last 6 months. That's where we are today. What happens next? Well, no good news. The fighting will not just continue, it will intensify by the looks of it. Ukraine has changed tack. Earlier it was defending itself, now it's on the offensive. The shift began with the attacks on Crimea. 2 key Russian bases were struck, an ammunition depot and a military aircraft. Russia called it sabotage. Ukraine refused to take responsibility, but last week their defense minister spoke out. He said that we're using a strategy to ruin their stocks, to ruin their depots, to ruin their headquarters, commander quarters. It's our answer to their meat grinder tactics. So he's saying it in so many words. Ukraine is using covert attacks to weaken Russian forces. What is the end game? President Volodymyr Zelensky says he wants to take back every piece of land that's in Russian control, and this includes Crimea.
And we will put our hands up only once when we will celebrate our victory, the whole of Ukraine, because we do not trade our lands and our people. For us, Ukraine is all of Ukraine, all 25 regions without any concessions or compromises. We do not know these words. They were destroyed by missiles on February 24th. Donbass is Ukraine, and we will regain it, whatever the path may be. Crimea is Ukraine, and we will regain it.
Crimea is Ukraine, says Zelensky. He is building diplomatic support for his military campaign in Crimea. Yesterday, Kiev hosted a conference on the liberation of Crimea. 60 countries and international organizations registered their presence. 40 presidents and prime ministers joined. This includes leaders of G7 nations. So Ukraine wants to make Crimea the new battleground. What about Russia? What are they doing? They're pushing forward, trying to take as much territory as possible while not letting go of what they have. What are Moscow's targets? Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. Russian forces are already present here. The aim is to fully control these territories and integrate them with Russia. Why these 4 territories? Russia believes control over these regions is necessary to end the war. From here, they can weaken.
Now, where is this coming from? Is this speculation? Is this an analysis from, just the outside perspective? Where is this set of data coming from here? This is what the next attacks are going to be. They need to do this. Again, just
Western support to Ukraine, they can buy time and mount a larger offensive. That's apparently the plan. In July, President Vladimir Putin signaled the making of a bigger offensive.
We are hearing that they want to defeat us on the battlefield. What can I say? Let them try. We have often heard that the West wants to fight us until the last Ukrainian. It's a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, but it looks like it's heading in that direction. But everybody should know that, largely speaking, we haven't even yet started anything in earnest. At the same time, we don't refuse peace talks, but those who refuse should know that the longer it lasts, the more difficult it will be for them to make a deal with us.
Ukraine sees what's coming. It's been warning about a Russian escalation, a special operation around Ukraine's Independence Day. Well, today was the day. Nothing has happened so far, and yet we know that this is war. Nothing can be taken for granted. And there's one world power that is closely watching this battle, which is China. The Communist Party has studied the fall of the Soviet Union extensively. It took lessons from the fall of the USSR to secure its grip on power at home. And now Beijing is carefully studying Russia's offensive in Ukraine, because when China decides to invade Taiwan, the lessons from Ukraine might come in handy. In fact, China is already applying these learnings, they are applying these learnings already. Let me tell you how. What is the most obvious takeaway from the war in Ukraine? that no modern-day war can end swiftly. Russian forces were overconfident. They believed they could swiftly capture Kiev. It did not happen. Ukraine's forces were able to defend their capital. Western weapon supplies boosted Ukraine's firepower. And this forced the Russian forces to retreat to their strongholds. What has China learned from this? That it's going to need a lot more firepower to invade Taiwan. So Beijing now wants to build more warships. A new report has some details on this plan. It says the Communist Party has recently given new orders. They have restarted the construction of guided missile destroyers. What's a guided missile destroyer? It's basically a warship. It is equipped to launch guided missiles. Now, these are weapons that can dictate their own path. They can chase targets and strike them without the need for constant human interference. China is said to be building 5 missile destroyers for its navy. Some pictures have come out. These are from the Dalian shipyard in northern China. These are the warships under construction. Why does China need more destroyers? To create a blue water navy, a fighting force on the high seas that can operate almost anywhere in the world. China wants to compete with the US military. It wants the ability to challenge the US in any theater of conflict. Dominating the high seas is a big part of that plan. And for that, China needs a massive navy first. By 2031, it plans to add at least 5 aircraft carriers, over 60 cruisers and destroyers, a range of logistical vessels and strategic bombers. With this firepower, China will dominate the Indo-Pacific, or it hopes to. This would make a potential invasion of Taiwan much easier. How close is China to doing this? Let's look at some numbers. China already has the world's largest navy. It has 300,000 active personnel,
Again, just if we're doing a reflection of your personal coverage, being reviewed by somebody who just, pretty much needed this exact review, this summary. But this is what I hear our unbiased yet completely biased media network expressing their fear, our military response. So, Wion'S, what does this image right here help in the end goal of ending this war and working towards some resolution? Being a guided missile towards that goal, to try to bridge this gap between all the nations, especially since India is kind of in the middle. China is a superpower. It is the oldest civilization still existing right next to probably India. And then, it goes like that. So, it's just, I hear the rhetoric that, just if you play, those who play with fire will get burned. And when you just throw out stuff like this, like, oh, they will become this if they do this, is just like being the serpent coming out and just saying, hey, like, here's some knowledge. And then you just leave it up for whoever our military looks at this and just says, oh my gosh, these figures just came out like they're planning on doing this. It's like, and then our leaders, it's just, I see the dots connecting. Again.
29 submarines, 2 aircraft carriers, 41 destroyers, and more than 100 small boats and ships. Decided to crunch them today. And what we found was mind-boggling. How many times do you think Chinese aircraft were detected near Taiwan this month? 735 times. 735. What about warships? At least 140 times. What is China trying to prove?
Compared to what? Like, how many times were they spotted before? Like it's just. We all need a world initiated. I don't know. We have to look at these kinds of knowledge, light that is being perceived from the creator's perspective as something good, that it's going to produce good fruit. And that's what worries me, is that so many people who I have been seeing as stars in the sky passing down light for all I'm around, it's just, it's hard for me to just, I don't know. I wish I could just say, hey, look, the whole media platform is open. I'm searching through TikTok, YouTube especially, all these things, through channels, through C's, for hosts who follow the commands of the man who began this whole thing, yet because the mind of man wasn't prepared, because their stars, their teachers, their guides were selective on how they and who they distributed. This, it's just got to stop. We all, the people who I'm holding with a close eye of judgment are the people who have been on my network, this world network. I'll let the world judge, knowing just kind of how my eyes look at this and how my eyes have been judging my sky. And just, I leave it to the world. The people of the world have the power to just give me their take on this. So before I even go further, at 19 minutes, I will deliberate here, and I want to hear more comments, I guess. I just got to step back from this for a second. So again, 19 minutes. Thank you, Gravitas, Wion'S, and this woman for just her light here for me. Just at least getting a sense of just where these things could have been, like, or think of it as like, if I had a time machine, I was going to try to fix this. At what point would I try to go in this timeline to even start? So this definitely helps me identify that. So for that, I am grateful to just this network for at least giving this in rhetoric and stuff like that. It's not as polarizing as what, you know, my neighborhood is hearing over here. So I'm glad that the entire rest of the world's neighborhood has this as like their CNN, although they claim to be like the other side of the story to CNN and NBC. She didn't say anything about Fox. But again, the world to a candid world. Please tell me what am I overjudging? Giving out my observation here? You guys let me know. Because I don't know. This is a time when I just got to step back and just look at this and just interpret this. So consider this my Sabbath for, yeah.